On the 24th of December 1994, Air France Flight 8969, registration FGBEC, was scheduled to take off from the Algerian capital city of Algiers for the French capital, Paris. Suddenly, just before takeoff, 4 armed men disguised as police officers seized control of the aircraft and held its 223 passengers and flight crew hostage with their AK-47s, mini Uzis and packs of dynamite. Immediately, 2 of the hostages were killed before a communication link via radio was established with Algerian authorities, to whom the hijackers proclaimed their allegiance to the armed Islamic group and demanded the release of 2 imprisoned leaders of an Islamist political party that had been banned in Algeria in 1992. In response, the negotiators asked for all the women and children on board to be released unharmed if negotiations were to move forward, a request that was carried out without incident and led to the release of 63 of the hostages. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Mediterranean, the French government was monitoring the situation closely, and in the late evening of the 24th of December gave authorization for the deployment of 40 operators from the National Gendarme Intervention Group, or more commonly referred to as GIGN, which is a French counter-terrorism unit. However, despite the fact that a large portion of the passengers on board Flight 8969 were French citizens, the Algerian government refused the entry of the GIGN into the country, primarily fearing a political blowback over allowing foreign troops to deal with a national crisis. Consequently, the aircraft carrying the GIGN was rerouted to Spain, where they remained on high alert in anticipation for any significant developments. Back in the Algerian capital, the situation was rapidly deteriorating, as the terrorists, realising they were gaining no headway with the Algerian negotiators, demanded for the plane to be flown to Paris. When this was refused, a 3rd hostage was killed, resulting in the Algerian authorities, after cooperating with their French counterparts, giving the all-clear for Flight 8969 to take off for the French capital in the late evening of Christmas Day, with a mid-flight refuelling stop scheduled to take place in the city of Marseille. Simultaneously, the 40-man GIGN detachment, still on standby in Spain, was ordered to deploy to Marseille immediately and prepare for a boarding operation. Arriving in the city at approximately 03:30 on the 26th of December 1994, just minutes before the hijacked plane also landed, the GIGN spent the morning and afternoon rehearsing for an assault, whilst French police took over negotiations with the hijackers, who not only reiterated their request to go to Paris, but also demanded for the aircraft to receive 27 tons of fuel for the trip. This second demand was particularly concerning for the French, as that was 3 times the amount of fuel required for the flight to the capital, prompting fears that the terrorists intended to turn Flight 8969 into a flying bomb. Subsequently, in a bid to draw out the negotiations, food and drink were delivered to the hijackers, a task that was carried out by a handful of GIGN operators disguised as airport staff, who used the opportunity to gather vital intelligence on the situation inside Flight 8969 and plant listening devices throughout the cabin. In addition, the hijackers accepted an offer to hold a press conference on board the plane, which was all part of a ruse by the French police to separate the hostages from the terrorists, with the bulk of the former being relocated to the rear of the aircraft, whilst the latter were confined to the front section. Eventually, at 16:45 on the 26th of December, the hijackers, having run out of patience, forced the flight crew to move Flight 8969 closer to the airport's control tower, from where they issued a final warning for the plane to get into the air by 1700, or they threatened severe action. Then, as this deadline passed, a couple of the terrorists opened fire on the control tower, leaving the French authorities with no other option but to give the green light for the GIGN to storm Flight 8969. Commencing just after 17:10 in the evening of the 26th of December 1994, 3 air stairs, each carrying a team of GIGN operators, approached the hijacked aircraft from its tail end, with Team 1 tasked with securing the cockpit, whilst Teams 2 and 3 seized the cabin. At the same time, around the airport, GIGN sniper teams took up positions overlooking the plane, from where they could provide fast support to the boarding operation if necessary. Making their final approach to Flight 8969, Teams 2 and 3, each comprising 11 operators, docked their air stairs onto the rear cabin doors and conducted a simultaneous assault, swinging open the entranceways before storming in and shouting for the hostages to keep their heads down. Once no terrorists were identified in the cabin section, the French troops began the process of evacuating the hostages to safety, deploying the emergency escape chutes, thus enabling the civilians to exit the aircraft. Meanwhile, whilst this was unfolding, Team 1, led by Major Dennis Favier and made up of 8 operators, commenced this assault against the front section but soon ran into difficulties. As Major Dennis Favier recalls, "There was a small problem with the height of the air stair as it was a little bit higher than the door. When we approached, the air stair hit the top of the door, although a slight step back, and the door opened. The air stair touched the plane again and the team went in. After several seconds of trying to get the door open, one of the operators threw his body weight behind the door and successfully opened it, enabling his colleagues to storm into the plane. Almost instantly, gunfire ripped through the front section of the cabin as Team 1 made contact with the hijackers, all of whom were holed up inside the cockpit with 3 members of the flight crew. Courageously, one of the French soldiers stood at the entrance to the cockpit and engaged the terrorists with his MP5, during which he killed one and wounded another, prior to being forced into cover as he incurred several wounds himself. Behind him, another operator took his place and likewise began firing into the cockpit, until he also became wounded, as did a further 2 soldiers of Team 1. Major Dennis Favier continued, "Those guys, the hijackers, were firing through the walls of the plane. We received hundreds of rounds in the first minutes." With half of Team 1 down, several members of Teams 2 and 3 moved forward to the front section to assist their wounded colleagues and pin down the enemy, with the resultant engagement leading to a second hijacker being killed. Caught up in the middle of the firefight were the 3 members of the flight crew also trapped inside the cockpit, one of whom, the co-pilot, sees an opportunity to escape out of one of the windows and onto the tarmac below, leading to him fracturing one of his elbows and fires in the process. Despite his injuries, his escape greatly assisted the GIGN, whose sniper teams positioned around the airport now had a clear line of sight into the cockpit and were able to engage the enemy, with accurate sniper fire fatally wounding a 3rd hijacker. By this stage in the operation, all the hostages in the cabin had been evacuated to safety, while several more GIGN operators made their way to the front air stair to assist Team 1 with securing the cockpit. Although reinforced, Team 1 was unable to flush out the 4th and final terrorist, who used a grenade and small arms fire to keep the GIGN at bay for 20 minutes, with one bullet striking the sidearm of one of the operators and detonating his ammunition. Fortunately, his injuries didn't prove fatal and he later recovered from his wounds. In the end, just 22 minutes after the start of the assault, the 4th hijacker was killed and the final 2 crew members were safely evacuated from the aircraft, having survived the ordeal by shielding themselves behind the dead bodies of 2 of the terrorists. As soon as Flight 8969 was back in French hands, Major Dennis Favier at 17:35 on the 26th of December 1994 transmitted the following message: "The operation is terminated, damage limited." This simple message brought an end to the 54-hour hostage siege that left all 4 hijackers dead and sadly claimed the lives of 3 innocent civilians.